Welcome back to what we hope will be a much-anticipated episode on Stories Lost. This might not be a story lost on those in the know, because it really should be classified as one of these uniquely and clearly unforgettable jewels from the vaults of unexplained phenomena. Let's dive right in. On September 10th, 1954, Marius Dewilde, a young metalworker, who claimed to have worked as a traveling circus performer, fought in the resistance, and traveled around the world in the French merchant marine, all of this before his 33rd birthday, stepped outside his isolated residence, an abandoned railway station house in Quarouble, France. Responding to his dog's urgent barking, he ventured out with a flashlight, expecting a routine investigation. Little did he know, this night would thrust him into an extraordinary encounter. At first mistaking a shadowy vessel on the railroad tracks for a farmer's cart, Dewilde approached it cautiously, only to spot two mysterious figures lurking nearby. Thinking them to be smugglers, common in the area, he moved to intervene. Before he could act, however, a beam of light rendered him immobile, allowing him to witness the unfolding events with clarity, even as his body remained paralyzed. In that moment, he unwittingly became a focal point for those interested in UFO phenomena in post-war France. His earnest demeanor and frantic search for authorities later that night convinced both observers and skeptics alike of the authenticity of his experience. Also, that same night, when investigators arrived and began their search, an interesting event occurred. A freight train was approaching, and as it passed the spot where the object had landed, a loud bang was heard. The driver stopped the locomotive and went to check what had happened. There, the driver, the researchers, and the witness noted that there was a depression in the tracks over an area of 6 meters. The next day, the investigators returned to the site and discovered new evidence. They found that there were no footprints at the location due to the hard soil throughout the area. But there were marks on the tracks at 5 different points. These marks were each 4 square centimeters, spread across 3 rails. They resembled indentations caused by rectangular section bodies, and even included a penetration bevel, indicating that a force of 30 tons had been exerted on the wooden tracks. The bevel of penetration suggests that the object made the marks with angled or sloped edges, not just straightforward depressions, implying a specific geometric shape of the object. These marks were symmetrical. On the ballast stones, there were blackened marks precisely at the spot exposed to the underside of the object that landed there. The stones collected from this location appeared to be calcined, fragmenting easily, while stones collected from other nearby areas were normal. The marks left at the site corroborated his account, prompting the French state and media to consider various explanations, from Cold War technologies to meteorites, yet none fully explained the surreal encounter he had experienced. On that early autumn night, Dewilde joined the ranks of hundreds of French men and women who reported witnessing unidentified flying objects or encountering alien beings over the span of 2 months. Unlike many of these stories, however, over time, Dewilde's became perhaps one of the most important standout cases in the debates, ascribing meaning to this 1954 rash of sightings. Among those who eventually sought to explain the case was ufologist Marc Thirouin. His investigations are at the core of this week's episode and are published in the magazine Uranos, issue 24 and 25. In the early 1950s, Uranos emerged as a seminal publication dedicated to the burgeoning field of ufology. Named after the ancient Greek deity symbolizing the sky, Uranos captured the imagination of readers with its in-depth analysis, investigative reports, and scholarly articles on UFO sightings and extraterrestrial phenomena. Marc Thirouin started out a professed skeptic of Dewilde's testimony, but as his investigations slowly progressed, he felt obliged to shift his position. In Uranos, issue 24, he explains what initial suppositions that at first guided his inquiry. Thirouin writes, "In the days following September 10, 1954, the daily and weekly press echoed a rather unusual event. A resident of Quarouble, a small town located 8 kilometers from Valenciennes, Mr. Marius Dewilde claimed to have observed that evening around 10:30 p.m., a flying saucer that had landed on the railway track next to his cottage, a disused level crossing post, and to have been paralyzed by a mysterious ray just as he was about to capture two small beings dressed in spacesuits. Mark Thirouan continues. In France, we were at the beginning of a period of landings of disc-shaped craft and encounters with strange beings, which would last until around mid-November and passionately occupy the sensational periodicals and readers, eager for the marvelous, but also intrigue in a much more thoughtful way. The objective minds whose attention had been awakened by the quality of certain witnesses and the characteristic details of their observations. Several of these witnesses were also to experience the effects of the infamous paralyzing ray. It became doubtful that such a convergence in testimonies could be the simple result of a sudden epidemic of hallucinations or hoaxes. However, at the International Center for Space Studies, host for the publication Uranos, Dewilde's account, as published by newspapers and magazines, did not fail to arouse some skepticism. There were too many significant variations from one account to another, particularly regarding the shape of the craft, as well as the size and equipment of the unknown beings allegedly observed by Dewilde. Take, for instance, some extreme cases of willful media coverage. Radar, for example, on pages 1 and 3 of its September 26th issue, depicted or described an ellipsoidal saucer and beings no more than 80 centimeters tall, enclosed in a wide and rigid spacesuit without apparent arms. In contrast, according to La Semaine du Nord on September 16th, the beings were over 1 meter tall, dressed in a suit. The next day, that graphic was reproduced in Nord France magazine with additional details, while the craft was depicted as a simple dome. Mark Thirouan continues to write. A month later, on October 10, 1954, a second landing was reported by Dewilde near his home, but this time in broad daylight, and he claimed to have made contact with one of the occupants of the flying disc. Subsequently, I was to hear an interview with Dewilde, and I must admit that I was not very favorably impressed at the time by the witness's tone, which seemed a bit mocking to me, although his account itself remained perfectly coherent. We studied these questions at length in the study committee, and then, due to the inextricable difficulties we encountered, I set out to conduct a series of systematic on-site investigations, encompassing notable cases of UFO landings, observations of extraterrestrials on the ground, and momentary paralysis apparently caused by an unknown type of radiation. These investigations each time allowed me to obtain direct information, assess the credibility of the witness, the accuracy of their observations, and correct many errors made by a non-specialized press, errors which the witness himself was the first to be outraged by. The investigation I conducted with Marius Dewilde in Quarable for nearly a week should normally be the subject of a monograph, as it is difficult to compress the wealth of information into a few pages of a magazine. My investigations focused on the materiality of the facts, the coherence and plausibility of the account, the mental stability and moral integrity of the witness, and the opinions of the Quarable population and local authorities regarding him. I inquired at his workplace, sought to determine whether Marius Dewilde's statements were motivated by a desire for profit or publicity, whether he was subjected to certain pressures, or was an agent of a coordinated operation. For hours, I examined the site, the marks left on the railway ties, collected samples, measured the magnetism of the top and side faces of the rails centimeter by centimeter. Along the way, I immersed myself in the atmosphere of Quarable until these things, facts, and people became familiar to me, allowing me to detect the slightest dissonance in their mutual interweaving. All this is difficult to detail in a few clear and precise lines. Words noted around the table, or engraved in my memory, lose the resonance they had on sight. The good faith of a witness lies in the gestures of his hands, the clarity of his gaze, his lifestyle, the reactions of his wife, the judgment of his friends and enemies, in the way he strives to make up for the lack of evidence. But of course, a jury in a criminal trial cannot in good conscience condemn to death or acquit an accused person without solid proof, even if there are other indicators. The same principle should apply when determining the accuracy of a scientific fact, no matter how interesting it may be. From Quarable, however, I brought back more than personal convictions. Not only did my daily contact with Dewilde and the information gathered about him make the hypothesis of a hoax practically inconceivable, but I also saw and studied the marks found on the railway ties by the air police. Additionally, I received testimony from a local authority, which the press has never mentioned until now, and whose undeniable credibility lends the affirmed facts the seal of authenticity. Therefore, with my mind as free as objectively possible from the skepticism with which I began my investigation, I will now report the statements of Marius Dewilde. I will spare you the need to note references to the investigative elements that led me to accept his version at every line. On Friday, September 10, 1954, around 10:30 p.m., Dewilde told me, I was reading in the kitchen of my house when my dog, in the yard, started barking. As he became very nervous, I went out to see what was happening. At first, I saw nothing, but as I moved to the door of the yard, I noticed a dark mass in the shadows a few meters to my left, near the railway track. Coming out from the light, I couldn't see clearly. My first thought was that it was a cart. At that moment, two beings emerged from behind the house to my right. Immediately, I imagined they were smugglers and prepared to pursue and apprehend one of them. I first shone my flashlight on them and saw that the light beam reflected off their heads like it was glass, and that the rest of their bodies were covered in a sort of dark, flexible suit. I estimated their height to be 1.20 meters or 1.30 meters. They appeared well proportioned to me. Suddenly, from the object I had mistaken for a cart, a very powerful, though not blinding light beam shot in my direction, and I felt completely paralyzed. However, I remained conscious and saw the two beings pass quickly, barely a meter away from me, over the cement slab in front of the yard door. I heard their footsteps on the slab. It was a dull sound. They hurried towards the stationary object. Their movements were smooth, reminiscent of young, agile beings, like alpine hunters. But they seemed lighter and faster than humans. Unable to turn my head, I couldn't follow them with my eyes once they moved out of my fixed field of vision, which was at about a 90-degree angle from the position of the object. Despite this angle, I could perceive the light beam, but, curiously enough, I couldn't say whether I was seeing it with my eyes or sensing it internally. I felt tingling all over my body, somewhat like pins and needles, with a pleasant numbness that didn't prevent me from seeing or hearing. I thought I was going to die. My scream stayed in my throat. I heard what sounded like the very quick closing of a sliding door. Then the beam switched off and immediately I came to my senses. Next thing I knew, the thing rose. It appeared oblong to me, topped with a dome, approximately 6 meters long and 3 meters high, with an aluminum-like color, though less shiny, white, slightly yellow, and pale. It rose to about 30 or 40 meters perhaps, vertically, flat. Then at an angle, still flat I think, but becoming luminous. Its color then was red-orange, but its brightness seemed less than that of a car's taillight. Its size diminished quickly. In a few seconds, it disappeared to the southwest in the direction of Valenciennes. At the moment of its takeoff, there was a violent displacement of air. I felt a warm wind with a smell reminiscent of the subway or a submarine, which was noticeable. It seemed as if the craft was supported by a column of air as it ascended. I felt slightly off balance. Was it because I had just regained my senses? I don't know, but I heard no engine noise. After this adventure, I was pale, breathless, and suffered from severe cramps. That night, I left on my moped to the gendarmerie. I rang the bell and waited for about an hour, but since no one answered, I went to the customs office, thinking I might find the gendarmes there, but I didn't find them there either. Then I went to the police station in Anaing, where I recounted what had happened to me. I later learned that my ringing had not woken the guard post, and that sanctions were imposed following this incident. I returned home around 1 or 1:30 in the morning, having traveled about 20 kilometers. The air police from Lille, and then those from Paris, came to the scene equipped with a Geiger counter. Representatives from the prefecture and sub-prefecture were dispatched. The gendarmerie, the police station, and officials from the Ministry of Air also conducted investigations. Along with journalists and onlookers, I received several hundred people in Quarable. Mark Thirouin now goes on to emphasize that before adding any commentary to this first account and publishing further elements of his investigation, It is essential to reproduce the report given by Marius Dewilde of his second observation that took place exactly 1 month later. Although generally less known, it is significantly more spectacular. These two cases complement each other, and it is on the whole that an opinion must be formed. It is also on the whole that I proceed to summarize both findings and conclusion, Therouan cautious us. I will now account for the second encounter, that according to Marius Dewilde took place on the 10th of October, and thereby I conclude my report. It was between 11:30 and noon, Marius told me, when my 3.5-year-old son came to warn me that there was a car on the track. I went outside. I saw 50 meters away a craft of the same shape and dimensions as the one I saw a month earlier. It was not on the same track, but on the one that passes on the other side of the house. There was a rectangular opening at the base of the dome of the craft. All around this base were a series of bumps, whose meaning I did not understand. There was also, above the opening, like a horizontal row of portholes. I distinguished 3 or 4, but saw nothing through them. The figures had human appearance, dressed in a dark gray suit that enveloped them completely, and were busy around the craft. There were 2 on the disc platform, 1 on each side of the rectangular opening. Later, I saw 2 others come out from behind the disc, or, more precisely perhaps, from underneath. A 5th emerged through the opening, descended to the ground and spoke to the others. He seemed to be the leader. I had not stopped advancing towards the craft while making these observations, so we met about 3 meters from the craft. The being in front of me was about 1.10 meters tall. He gave me the impression of being small but not a dwarf. He was entirely clad in what appeared to be a waterproof one-piece suit, with a helmet featuring a transparent part in front of the face, gloves, and shoes, all made of a very flexible, dark, matte gray material, which could have been waterproof fabric, plastic, or rubber. A bulge descended vertically from under his right arm to mid-thigh. Through the transparent part of the soft helmet, I could see his face, part of his ears, and the start of his hair. His general appearance was Asian, Mongolian. His jaw was quite strong, with high cheekbones, very dark hair and eyebrows, brown eyes. His skin was fairly brown, that of a white man with a tan, not pinkish but tanned, somewhat comparable to that of Arabs, darker in the places where we have beard. No mustache, eyes not protruding. The being patted my son, whom I held in my arms, tapped me on the shoulder with a smile, and began to speak to me in a language I did not know. He seemed annoyed that I did not understand him. I could hear him very well, which is quite curious since he was speaking to me through his helmet. I saw that he had very white, impeccable teeth. Overall, his face was regular, clear, truly beautiful. His smile was completely human, as were his facial expressions and gestures. The beings around the craft, similar to him, whom I glimpsed, also smiled occasionally. I was 3 meters from the craft and could hear faint murmurs from inside. It seemed to me that I heard repeated, "Baukak, Baukak." Looking through the opening, I saw 2 other beings, one lying on the ground. I assumed it was him who was groaning, and the other standing beside him. Since I was almost in line with the door, I could glimpse inside, and I saw a brick-like material that was truly strange, numerous small things, buttons of different colors, sorts of pressure gauges, etc., in this dark, grayish metal, impeccably clean. The language in which the being spoke to me apparently was neither Chinese, nor an Indo-Chinese language, nor Siamese. The sequence of sounds seemed more European to me, but it was not, in my opinion, English, German, or any Roman language. I am truly unable to specify further, not being at all familiar with foreign languages. The being took a few steps towards one of my poultry, which was pecking nearby. He bent down and grabbed one of the hens. Instead of fleeing and squawking as these animals usually do when I try to catch them, this one relaxed and allowed itself to be taken peacefully. I was astonished. Holding it in his hands, he showed it to me, and then gave it to the 2 beings who had remained near the door. They took it, bending down slightly. Finally, the being stroked my child again on the head, tapped me on the shoulder again kindly, then gestured for me to step aside. He climbed into the craft, preceded by the 2 individuals to whom he had handed the hen, and followed by the other 2 who had been behind or under the craft a moment before. Two of them helped him climb in by giving him their hands. The figure standing inside had bent down to move the one lying down, to clear the entrance. Watching them move like this, I noticed they were well-proportioned, had a relaxed manner, and despite being subject to gravity, they did not seem to feel its weight or experience any fatigue. A panel closed the door, sliding from top to bottom, quite quickly but gently. Then the craft took off vertically, silently and without smoke, and disappeared towards the east. I had time to glimpse the underside of the disc. There was a raised central part, surrounded by small circles and lines arranged in spokes. I was not very inclined to reveal this observation, remembering the trouble the first one had caused me. But my wife couldn't help but mention it, and word got out, which brought another wave of investigators to the scene. It is with the utmost calmness that Marius Dewilde recounts this story to me and answers my endless questions, notes Marc Thirouin. He points out the location of the traces left on the tracks by the mysterious visitors and informs me that the sleepers, or support beams, on the track where the first landing occurred, have been replaced along a stretch of about 50 meters, including the section bearing the traces. I verify this myself as I pass by the line, and it leaves me deeply perplexed. During my investigation, I am told that the sleepers were in poor condition. That is true, but they are all in such a state on these tracks, and it is incomprehensible that the administrative authorities' maintenance concerns were so selectively applied to the section containing the famous marks. Marc Thirouin and Marius Dewilde leaves us all with the task of making sense of this strange affair. In the aftermath of Dewilde's encounter, the general public's reaction was a mix of fascination, skepticism, and even fear. The alleged encounter challenged the public's understanding of the universe and their place within it. Questions had to be raised about the existence of extraterrestrial life and the potential for interstellar communication. Some claim that the Dewilde incident mirrors the societal and political changes happening in post-war France. By skeptics interested in historicizing, the UFO phenomenon could be viewed as an expression of the anxieties and hopes of a nation grappling with the realities of a rapidly changing world. Why do these reports entice the public? Why do we remain curious and are tempted to let loose the reins of rationality and not disregard all accounts that just sound too outlandish? Maybe because we can't be sure that we are holding all the cards, have stacked up all the answers and dispelled all mysteries. I would venture to say, no matter who we are or to what degree we are prone to doubt or to believe, it is clear that the occurrence of these types of testimonies have profound implications. They force us to confront the vastness of the universe and our place within it. Just think, what would it mean to talk to the stars or reach out to the infinite possibilities of communicable life? Should we message our foreign counterpart a Tesla, a symphony, or the sound of waves? Should we, like Marius Dewilde, try to show our compassion and goodwill, even when we feel threatened and small? Perhaps that is the strongest message we can send about what it is to be a human on a blue planet. Hope you've liked this episode. Want to support the content creation on this channel? Like, subscribe, and drop us a comment. We hope to welcome you back to our next episode. Stay tuned, or rather yet, tell us where you want us to make landfall next time. This week, we want to extend a warm thank you for the coffee to Dogface64. Your support means a lot to us. Do you also want to support the channel's work in shedding light on lesser-known UFO cases? Head over to buymeacoffee.com/storieslost. Next week, we return to Scandinavia and the Norwegian forests.